بيشا تو دتري 1011 شاريلي أسيريا تيفي بفروسيفي وموزا بناو هاوي أسيريا تيفي أوقولو حيرو وأوقولو شاريو دوعامو سريوي ببريثو وأوني جد أسيريا تيفي دماحت فرجونو بوفوكوس ودنوقل الطيبة وشو شوت تكون بين دوعاميذن لبريثو كولا لجن أسيريا تيفت قدرم داوم بوف الحونيذي قلو زملي إم عذرون ثثخو إذا كورحميتو أو شغلت أسيريا تيفي وكوحوزيتو إلصويثت أسيريا تيفي بو حقلو دي ميديا مفصوحين ساقيد معضريتو أسيريا تيفي درب مشحل في كبخ معضريتو أسيريا تيفي كبخو هويتو هادومي بو فيسبوك منيونو زوزة ناعيمة أو إنقلد رحميتو دهويتو هادومي بو يوتيوب تاموستب منيون زوزة ناعيمة كبعيتو دهو الخوميديا تكتلا قولو حيرو ودلتيو ما صرتو عم قابش وتوسي توكوسي وأوعيتا ووثي مقوايو أسيريا تيفي مقوايو وقولتخو يميديا
Algilo is an independent scholar and researcher based in Ankara currently. I hope to have him soon in Salamanca, whether he wants or not. He has a PhD in Syrisch Studies and a baccalaureate in Semitic languages from Sydney University, as well as a master degree in Syriac Christianity from Leiden University. Previously, he has taught classical Syriac at Sydney University and the University of Melbourne. He has been professor at Kader Has University in Istanbul. And of course, he has published many articles. And what I very much appreciate is his vigorous way of dealing with the topics he researches on. So this is why I'm very happy having him here. He is also currently the English language editor of Banipal Journal, the quarterly publication of the General Directorate for Syriac Culture and Arts in northern, I would say, Assyria, not Iraq. Additionally, he is involved in efforts to introduce Syriac language teaching at the university and the country of the north. When I last time was in Ashur, we met with the responsibles of the Dohuk University, where hopefully we will be able to launch a joint degree, and I accepted to do so just with a condition: if they accept our Dr. Nicholas Algilo as coordinator on behalf of the University of Salamanca. So I'm not going to take more time. He will be the one who will explain to you about today's topic, which is exploring psychological reasons for the rejection of Assyrian identity. So Nicholas Pshenu Shlamatelo, وهذا دوره خيلي.
Bshena Gano Kharabi, Howard Basima, thank you very much for your introduction, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you all today. Now, within the last quarter century, the identity issue among Aramaic-speaking Syriac Christians from northern Mesopotamia has become a hot topic that practically no person or organization has been able to solve. Neither a single church, political party, nor community association has been successful in bringing these people of the same linguistic, historic, and geographical origins together to accept one overarching identity out of the myriad of dialectal, tribal, regional, village, and denominational affiliations. Indeed, for any other nation or ethnic group, such diversity would be perceived as a source of cultural wealth and evidence of an existence of many millennia over a large shared territory. However, for the Assyrians, it has also become a curse as much as it is a blessing. In many ways, the identity issue had been festering in silence since the 1933 massacre of Assyrians belonging to the Church of the East at Semel in northern Iraq, which ushered in a period of intense secrecy for the Assyrian national movement, as well as the suppression of any expressions of pride in Assyrian national identity. Moreover, it became more and more unfashionable to identify with those rebellious Assyrians who had arbitrarily murdered Iraqi soldiers and wanted to tear apart the homeland to create their own separate nation state, according to Arab nationalist narratives prevalent in the media at the time. At any rate, they were just heretical Nestorians who didn't even believe in the correct form of Christianity according to the official narratives of the Catholic and Syriac-Orthodoxe churches. Prior to that, however, and especially in the First World War's aftermath, the issues of unity and identity had neither been so major nor divisive, since everyone seemed to agree on basic principles, including aspirations for an independent state, which, unfortunately, never materialized. One of the Assyrian delegations to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 was called the Assyro-Chaldean Delegation, with the blessing of the Chaldean Patriarch, and one of those advocating for a homeland for the ancient Assyrian nation was the Syriac-Orthodoxe Metropolitan of Homs in Syria, who was originally from Mosul in Iraq and later became the Patriarch of his church. Syriac Orthodox churches in North America and the Holy Land bore signs in English calling them Assyrian Apostolic or Assyrian Orthodox. Additionally, official Catholic publications such as the Catholic Encyclopedia and reports by the Congregation of Eastern Catholic Churches in Rome agreed that the Chaldean identity as an ethnic designation was incorrect, and instead favored the term Assyro-Chaldean, since the modern Chaldean Catholics were, according to them, more likely to be the descendants of the ancient Assyrians, or at least the people of ancient Assyria. Indeed, the name Assyro-Chaldean was one espoused by key intellectuals and leading figures in the Chaldean Catholic Church, beginning with Patriarch Audisho Khayyat of Mosul, while still a metropolitan in the 1880s, Father Samuel Jamil of Tel Kepe, who was the patriarchal vicar to the Vatican and head of the Chaldean Catholic Order of Antonine Monks of St. Hormizd, as well as Mar ad-Deysher of Shaklawa, who was metropolitan of Siirt until his murder by Ottoman authorities in 1915. Such hopes, though, for a future of interdenominational unity and cooperation on the Assyrian national issue were dashed with the Iraqi army's traumatic massacre of innocent Assyrian civilians, leading to a period of stagnation where Assyrian identity became increasingly attached to the Church of the East only. As a result, Chaldean, Chaldaya or Kildani came to replace such pejorative intergroup appellations as Papist and Uniate. Syriac, Süryaya or Süryani, came to replace the pejorative term Jacobite. And even more increasingly, its synonym, Assyrian, Athornaya or Athuri, came to instead replace the pejorative label Nestorian. At the same time, this led to a regionalization of these sectarian identities. Whereas most Syriac Orthodox came from Tur-Abdin and Mardin, as well as a handful of villages in the south of the Nineveh plain, the Chaldean Catholics lived in areas from Kirkuk, Erbil, and Mosul up to Zakho and Ahmadiyya in the north of Iraq. And the Assyrians, from the Church of the East, came to represent a foreign group of refugees from Hakkari in Turkey and Urmia in Iran, even though communities of adherents indigenous to what later became Iraq exist from Ahmadiyya to the country's border with Turkey. This also disregards the fact that most Chaldean Catholics were Nestorians until the period between the 16th and 19th centuries, when the majority of their ancestors converted to Catholicism. By the same token, most of the Syriac Orthodox in what is now Iraq were adherents of the Church of the East until the 7th century, when they switched allegiance to the Patriarchate of Antioch. Hence, using the current shorthand or common parlance in use since 1933, their ancestors were Athornaye, or Assyrians from the Church of the East. On the other hand, this fusion of sectarian identities with regional ones also led to the development of standard vernaculars based on regional dialects. In this way, the Urmia standard became the language of the Athornaye. The melange of dialects from Al-Qush and Tel Kepe in the Nineveh plain became the standard for the Chaldaye, and the mixed dialect of Tur-Abdin became the standard for the Suryoye. This led to the marginalization and even extinction of dialects perceived to be peripheral, which in fact represent the continuum between the three groups, such as Halmun Geramun, Botan, and various dialects from the Sapna district around Ahmadiyya. Thus, the stage was set for the hierarchies of the Chaldean Catholic and Syriac Orthodox Church especially to move away from the Assyrian identity and discourage their own adherents from calling themselves such, whether through campaigns of indoctrination or outright intimidation, including the threat of excommunication and alienation from their in-group. Already, these churches were termed millets, or religious nations, under the Ottoman system of administration for Christian minorities. In the 20th century, however, with the failure or collapse of the Assyrian national movement, its inability to secure legitimacy through the attainment of a nation-state, and the regressive marginalization of the name Assyrian to becoming a new politically correct terminology for a religious sect previously known as Nestorians, these other religious communities started to perceive themselves, or were perceived by others, as nations in their own right, with separate, secular, historical identities, which, while completely imagined, superficially still claim primordiality. This played into the agendas of nationalistic Middle Eastern governments who wished to ensure that the Assyrian national movement remained dead and buried, and that Assyrians stayed divided, marginalized, and without any power or agency. At the same time, the Assyrian identity became that of a sect, Ta'ifa. In this way, the name Athuri or Ashuri was relegated to a disliked or even hated denomination, namely the Church of the East, which is not in communion with any other church, was perceived by the others as being heretical, and had become stigmatized by the political controversies of 1933, which saw its adherents massacred, exiled to Syria, and their patriarch exiled to Cyprus and then the United States. Hence, we see that each church began to streamline and standardize itself, ironing out the wrinkles, so to speak, and eliminating the shades of grey that would have casted any doubt on this artificial homogeneity which they wanted to project. In this manner, we even observe that what is now called the Syriac-Orthodoxe Church, in its name correction efforts in the 1960s in the United States, sued what is now called the Antiochian Orthodox Church for the name Syrian in the US law courts, in order to use it to replace what it had previously labeled as Assyrian. Thus, the Syrian Orthodox Church became the Antiochian Orthodox Church, and the Assyrian Orthodox Church became the Syrian and later Syriac Orthodox Church. Moreover, each church now had its own standard spoken dialect, which it raised to the status of a language based on the sectarian identity, as well as a territory inhabited in the majority by its own adherents. Therefore, we witness a situation where exonyms, names by people outside the group for people inside the group, have been internalized as politically correct replacements for sectarian-based intergroup pejoratives, and have now become pseudo-national identities based on church affiliation. In fact, when one considers how people belonging to these three main religious denominations, since there are more, perceived themselves prior to 1933 and even 1915, we observe that they more or less agreed that they were the same ethnic group, albeit with internal sectarian differences, that were separate from other ethnic groups around them. They were neither Kurds, Arabs, Turks, nor Persians, and quite significantly, while they too were Christians, they were not Armenians, maybe except for the example that Malfono Shabo mentioned yesterday in Mlahso. In the bulk of their literature, which was written down in the classical Syriac language, the people are called Suryoye, Suryoye, and the language Lishana Suryaya or Lishona Suryoyo. In their various spoken dialects of Aramaic, however, the same people called themselves Suraye, Suryoye, and their language Surat, Surath, Surait, etc. And many of them still do. This in itself is evidence that these Christians, who all speak dialects of Aramaic, all belong to churches in which the liturgical language is Syriac, and who all come from areas in and around northern Mesopotamia, agree, or at least agreed, and that they all belong to the same ethnos. Yeah? While scholars may disagree on the origins of the terms Süryaniler and Surit, either positing that they developed directly from Akkadian Asurayi and Asuritu, or via Syriac Süryaya and Suryaith, which Professor Talay espouses, but I respectfully disagree with, at least the consensus is that even the term Süryaya, Syrian or Syriac, is etymologically derived from that for Assyrian, etc. Nevertheless, various groups within the ethnos see it fit to translate the name Suraya as they see fit, and in a way which does not conflict with their imagined concepts and respective views of their own separate artificial church nations. Some thus translate the word as Assyrian, which is what I was raised to believe, others as Syriac, with one group equating Syriac with Assyrian and another equating Syriac with Aramean, while an even larger group, especially among Chaldean Catholics, translate the word Suraya as meaning Christian. This even extends to them calling the spoken language Christian, or in some extreme cases, Catholic. And I also learned that even in Spain, when they want you to speak Spanish, they say, habla en cristiano, right? Speak Christian. At the beginning of the 20th century, we find that official population statistics from the Armenian Patriarchate of Constantinople, published in 1916, group the members of this Suraya ethnos together under the separate heading Nestorians, Jacobites, and Chaldeans. Today, these terms have been replaced with the politically correct terms Assyrians, Syriacs, and Chaldeans. At any rate, this is based on the Armenians' identification of all of the adherents of these three sects as belonging to the same nation which they called Assyrianer, Assyrians/Syrians. What we have after the First World War, and especially since the 1933 Semel massacre, though, is the development of the Assyrian people from one ethnos to a collection of sect, religion, and dialect-based in-groups, all viewing the other as an out-group. This mistrust and lack of intergroup cooperation and solidarity was encouraged by Ba'ath governments in Iraq and Syria, the sectarian-based government in Lebanon, and since 1992, by the government of the Iraqi Kurdistan region. Moreover, since the lead up to the United States Census in 2000, the issue of whether or not all North Mesopotamian Aramaic-speaking Syriac Christians are one people or not, and whether their identity should be called Assyrian, Chaldean, Syriac, or Aramean or not, has come to the fore, especially since they have ever increasingly become a diaspora people. While for many the name Assyrian had been the most satisfactory geographical and historical term to denote them, a large number of those who do not adhere to the Church of the East vehemently oppose this view, for the simple reason that they do not belong to a church which calls itself Assyrian, but instead espouses either a separate Chaldean, Babylonian, or Syrian Aramaic pseudo-national identity, both legitimized by their hierarchies and backed by Middle Eastern despots and dictators. For example, in the Iraqi Kurdistan region's first and only democratic elections in 1992, the Assyrian Democratic Movement won 4 out of the 5 seats reserved for Assyrians. Since then, the term has been changed to Chaldean Syriacs Assyrians. Additionally, a majority of the party's cadres, members, and supporters were Chaldean Catholics. Many of them still are. After observing this, there is evidence that the ruling majority party, the Kurdistan Democratic Party, began to encourage the establishment of opposition dummy parties and separatist Chaldean and Syriac organizations, whether through the efforts of their own members or through their direct financial support. This has successfully led to a splintering of the community, whereby people initially motivated by financial gain or upward social mobility have now internalized these separatist identities. Moreover, government institutions which once bore the title Assyrian, such as the Directorate of Assyrian Education and the Assyrian Cultural Directorate, had their identities changed to being Syriac. The proverbial nail in the coffin, so to speak, was the official removal of the silent alap from the beginning of the word Suryoye, which was an innovation introduced by Assyrian nationalists at the beginning of the 20th century, completely removing any implication that the name Suryoye had a link to being Assyrian. Now, everything in Iraq and the Kurdish-administered northern region relates to Syriac language and culture, as well as the Chaldean Syriac Assyrian people, or just simply Christians. Because of the fact that, for the reasons mentioned above, so many people not only do not identify as or call themselves Assyrians, but they are so vehemently against being called that, the general excuse is, well, you people can't agree on what to call yourselves or a single name to unify under, so we will either hyphenate all of your names together or group you together as Christians, since that's the only thing you can agree on. This is something that is still unresolved, ensuring the political marginalization of North Mesopotamian Aramaic-speaking Syriac Christians in both Iraq during the critical post-Saddam state formation period and Syria since its descent into civil war in 2011. Moreover, in Lebanon, they have neither been able to unify enough politically to have their own seat in parliament, and instead are usually represented by an Arab Protestant who represents minorities as an overarching generic term. Whether we like it or not, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Arameans, and even Syriacs have formed into separate cultural groups, leading to what social psychologists call in-group favoritism or bias, i.e., the favoring of members of one's in-group over outgroup members, creating group conflict or prejudice. Humans are a species that join together in groups by their very nature. However, they also have an innate tendency to favor their own group over others, with each group nourishing its own pride and vanity, boasting itself superior, existing in its own divinities, and looking with contempt on outsiders. And our church communities have done and still do this to each other. A key reason for this is the need to improve self-esteem and for one group to prove to itself why it's superior. Moreover, this categorization has accentuated or maximized the differences between each group in opposition to minimizing the similarities between in-group members. On the other hand, this has led to an out-group homogenization effect, where out-group members are perceived as more similar to each other than are in-group members. As an example of this is how members of each church tend to identify each other according to their village or town of origin. But those belonging to another church are lumped under the shortcut pseudo-national name given to it. So, for example, we might have Süryaniler, Süryaniler, Midhoye, whatever, Arboye, but those other people are Assyrian, for example. We don't look at their differences. We see them all as just one separate group. But in order to solve such psychological problems, they must first be identified and addressed. In many cases, the reasons for this rejection of a unified Assyrian identity and insistence on sectarian ones, whether hyphenated together or separated by commas, can be explained as psychological phenomena which lead to states of delusion, cognitive biases, and intellectual fallacies. Among the most important of these is the illusory truth effect, which is the tendency to believe false information to be correct after repeated exposure. Thus, when truth is assessed, people rely on whether the information is in line with their understanding of it. Or if it feels familiar, as they compare new information with what they already know to be true. Repetition makes things easier to process when compared to new, unrepeated statements, leading people to believe that the repeated conclusion is more truthful. This is also linked to outcome or hindsight bias, in which an event's outcome is emphasized more than what precedes it. For example, we know that we now call ourselves Chaldean, so our ancestors must have also been identified as Chaldeans in the past, and so any interpretations of historical sources will be leaned or skewed towards finding evidence of why they should today call themselves Chaldean, or Assyrian, or Aramean, etc. This can also be explained as a form of presentism and leads to confirmation bias, where people cherry-pick historical sources in order to prove their own point to be true. Familiarity, therefore, can overpower rationality, and repetitively hearing that a certain statement is wrong can even paradoxically cause it to feel right. So even those who know the truth to begin with can be persuaded to believe otherwise through processing fluency caused by repetition of a falsehood, such as the constant pairing of the names Syriac and Aramean together, Suryoye Oromoy, or the constant emphasis on a separate Chaldean or Aramean identity. Repetition, therefore, makes things easier to process or fluent relative to new statements. In turn, this can lead people to the false conclusion that they are more truthful. So, when an individual hears something for a second or third time, their brain responds faster to it and misattributes that fluency as a signal for truth. Those who identify as Arameans or Chaldeans have thus been primed through mere exposure to such ideas, and when faced with somebody telling them that they're Assyrian, well, it doesn't gel with them because they've already been told something else in their churches and associations. As can be observed, many different Assyrian communities are suffering from a collective dissociative amnesia, where a part of their historical memory has been repressed because of trauma. Such cases of memory distortion, false memory syndrome, memory impairment, or even memory pollution have made it difficult for those who identify as Chaldeans or Arameans, and even some who identify as Assyrians, to construct an accurate account of their present and past history through suppression and motivated forgetting. Such symptoms are common in people with depression, post-traumatic stress, and even schizophrenia. Now, I wouldn't go as far as saying that some Assyrian people are schizophrenic, but many of them are definitely suffering from depression and have been through traumatic stress caused by persecution, minoritization, war, etc. And the search for identity has been a way for many to make sense of what they had been through, as well as give meaning to their collective experiences. In other cases, people have been vulnerable to manipulation by their religious leaders because they have either been naive and uneducated, had a low self-esteem, and have been too trustful of or emotionally dependent on them. Such leaders have used disinformation, i.e., false information deliberately spread to deceive people, or obscurantism, the anti-intellectual practice of deliberately misrepresenting information and restricting knowledge through limiting further inquiry and understanding. In short, this is a symptom of conservatism, or the will of the religious and religious leaders to maintain hierarchy, authority, and privilege. Again, such politically motivated anachronisms, such as the usage of long-dormant Chaldean or Aramean identities, base themselves on an appeal to authority, where the opinion of a non-expert, such as such and such a patriarch or bishop, is used as evidence, or an appeal to tradition, in which a thesis is deemed correct on the basis of correlation with past or present tradition. For instance, this is right because we have always done it that way, when we really haven't. With the 1933 Semel massacre, we witnessed the secularization or nationalization of sectarian identities as a defense mechanism or reflex. This developed into mental shortcuts or heuristics, whereby certain names came to be used for corresponding religious denominations, making identifying as both Assyrian and Chaldean, for instance, or Assyrian and Syriac mutually exclusive. This developed into memory conformity, whereby individuals in church communities have been influenced by information reported by others and incorporated into their own memories. And this has been maintained through conservatism bias or belief perseverance, where a belief is maintained or insufficiently revised, even when presented with new evidence or information that firmly contradicts it. Okay, I'll try. Now, these include paradigm shifts, such as the Süryaniler inscription, which shows the obvious link between the names Syrian and Assyrian, as well as the wealth of information contradicting the proposed continuity of Chaldean identity among Christians in northern Mesopotamia before the 16th century. So, I have still a lot to say, but one thing that's important is collective amnesia. So, another mechanism that produces such collective amnesia is the change in population replacement through births and deaths. Now, new generations are exposed not to the unfiltered knowledge that's in their elders' heads, but rather the reconstructive knowledge that they felt safe to communicate. Suppose that an aging generation had disliked church leaders or disliked the policies of the church, but refrained from challenging it. If the young do not have experiences that make them dislike that institution, they'll preserve it according to social sanctions, but also perhaps mainly because the lack of public discourse has blinded them to flaws of the status quo and blunted their capacity to imagine better alternatives. So this preference and knowledge falsification of their parents will have left them intellectually handicapped. And unfortunately, that's the truth in a lot of our people. Now, according to Gibson's law, every thesis has an antithesis. So the idea that Aramaic-speaking northern Mesopotamian Syriac Christians all have to belong to one Assyrian nation can obviously be refuted. However, according to Occam's razor, if you have two competing ideas to explain the same phenomenon, then you should prefer the simpler one. Why would you believe that Arameans from Levantine Syria and Chaldeans from Babylonia moved to Assyria and displaced the local people when admitting to Assyrian continuity is much simpler? Well, sometimes the painful truth is harder to accept than blissful ignorance, and people are not so willing to learn an unsettling or life-changing truth by taking that red pill and instead opt to remain in the contented experience of ordinary reality. Now, in conclusion, one of the many strategies to combat separatism within our community is through minority influence, where a significant and strong minority can change the ideas of a majority to which it belongs through the consistency of its rhetoric and persistency in resisting adversity. Importantly, however, this needs to come from people considered as part of the in-group, rather than people from outside. It's not up to people from the Church of the East, for example, to point fingers at Chaldean Catholics and Syrian Orthodox and say, you are Assyrians. It needs to come from within. Additionally, lower levels of depression, greater life satisfaction, and generally better mental health are associated with a positive cultural identity or the sense of belonging to a social or cultural community and the promotion of collective pride. This encompasses personal, ethnic, and social self-identity and is critical for self-esteem. As we have seen, historical colonialism, oppression, persecution, genocide, and marginalization have contributed to poor mental health among Assyrians. As a community, therefore, we need to destigmatize mental health issues, improve individuals' resiliency to stress by teaching them techniques to decrease anxiety and coping methods, as well as increase community support, social capital, and cultural identity to prevent and cope with mental health issues, fostering a better sense of community and encouraging greater cohesiveness. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nicholas Algilo, for this excellent conference. As you know, we don't expect less informative conferences on your side. So I'm very sorry. I know this discussion could be, well, now have a period of questions, but we are a bit late and we have to be rigorous because now then we are going to have lunch. So I'm sorry to not give you any chance to have questions, but I'm sure you will do them while we will be eating or you will be walking to the restaurant. So thank you again, and as I told you, Nicholas, أخوني أو ترابرا بسيما الكل دانا داخل ممزمته خلوما دكتور جامد يوطالن بشأن وإسلام جاخر تاو هدا. We are going to jump directly to the next speaker, who will be introduced by Dr. Nicholas Algilo himself.
Sure.
Thank you.
Now, this is somebody that I know personally from Australia. I've even been to consult him a few times. He's a general practitioner who used to be based in Sydney, and he's originally from the town of Midyat in Tur-Abdin. He has, in the last couple of years, returned to his hometown where he's opened up a new medical practice, I was just talking about mental health, so I just skipped. But he's opened up a new medical practice, a medical clinic in Midyat. Dr. Zaytun Haddad, and he is going to be talking about how do we inquire about our identity and a work of the Assyrian identity. So I think I should leave the floor to Dr. Haddad.
Yes, I think he's hearing okay, but tell him please to turn on the camera.
Okay. Osio Zaito, is it kiboch fathat u camera didoch ktoeto. You can also write to him, because he knows English. He's from Australia. Yani, he lived in Australia. So we had somebody call the doctor directly. There you go. Thank you, Samira. That's easier.
Sometimes the technology is a big disadvantage, but the biggest part of the time is useful. While he's going to connect, I'm going to give you the information for the next, let's say, few hours. We are invited to a very nice restaurant here, very next to the university. So please, once we finish our session, we are going probably to be a bit late in order to regain the lost time. We are moving from here to the restaurant. It's about 5 minutes walking from here. And then there is a slight change, if I'm not wrong, in relation. Is he on?
Zaito, it's your turn. Please turn on your camera. We are ready for you, and also you can control your own slide presentation. So you can share your screen with us if you want, if you have a presentation, and you can control it. Tamam. Sorry.
No. Tell him that it's his turn, so he can.
Yeah, I told him. Maybe write to him and just say, it is your turn, hurry.
Escribe, it's your turn. Doctor, can you switch on your camera? We are waiting for you.
I can do that from here.
No, if you are you in your computer now? Dice que no le permite, ¿por qué le pasa?
No lo, yo puedo hacerlo desde aquí si le
Yeah, we will, so you allow us to do it from here for you, okay? Okay, good. Okay, bye. Okay, now, very good. Switch on your...
Your microphone is not on.
I think he doesn't have microphone because we can see the
Yeah.
icon.
Can you talk now?
He's fine.
Okay.
Switch on. فالأطلة mejor. ¿Lo puedes hacer tú? Switch on your microphone,
Yes,
please.
I did.
Good.
All
Continue.
right, thank you. Just 1 second.
He's got the blinds drawn. Asya is it كيف يتوتشيك يا حقوق نو لا لو مو سكرين لا توتشيك قريبا بس هو يا حقوق يكوفي.
Okay, better, yeah.
Okay.
اوكي عودت سريع. كنت لك presentation كنت لك slides.
Yeah, لم أقفل السلايدز أبانا
Okay,
بس
just talk.
Okay.
كنت لك حمش أسري قاطي نفسه قد.
Yes, yes. In English or Syrian?
In English, yeah,
Any
please.
language that you want.
Yeah, both languages I can. Yeah, yes, we will speak about how we develop personality, our personality. According to psychoanalysis, we are going to backwards to our childhood. From the childhood, we develop our personality. First, what we know, learn is Eid is the mother that we want to strive to her. She give us, she helping us. We are helpless. She helping us with everything what we need, and this need we call it, and according to psychoanalysis, we call it she or. That's why we call it ID. It's not IT, and that's the first step we want is to be with someone who protecting us, who giving us good care, and we want to be with them. When we are with them, we feel secure. We are not. This security is giving us shelter, everything. Yeah? And this is what we call it, we striving to eat. Now, with time, we develop our personal wishes. And so these wishes usually lead us to eat, to her, to mom at that time. And that is the ego slowly gaining strength. The more the strength we gain, the more we feel stronger. But at the same time, what looking us is Eid. And this Eid is taking us to there. Now there is, first instance, we want to unite with her. And this unity, there is some way stopping it. And who stops us is super ego. That is what we call it, the father. The super ego is the one which allow us certain things to do and certain things not to do. This, for example, superego is an ego that control our life. The superego is controlling the life of the society. This is superego. That's what we know from psychoanalysis is the way the ego, when controlling, when ego is the right ego can control self and superego, going hand in hand. Otherwise, superego will crush ego. Ego will be smaller, smaller, smaller. But at the same time, the personality will be difficult in that case. So the aid demanding, striving us to reach to her, and that is in our brain. We know we have hormones that binding us to her to eat, and this is a hormone. We call it oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hormone that binding us to our environment, to our friends, to our mother, to our parents, everyone that we love. The more that we love, the more this oxytocin is given by the inside the brain that we have to the bloodstream, and so we feel energetic. We want to reach her, but there is way to which hindering us. This way, this hindrance are we call it superego. Superego is saying, no, you cannot, you are not allowed this here because of many reasons. So you shouldn't do this. The feeling, guilt feeling, giving us the super ego. This if we don't develop super ego, guilt feeling, so we'll be senseless. So there is two controller the ego that us. One is asking to be close with them, and the superego, which is give us a certain way, allowing certain time to be uniting or not uniting, and that is the church took over this superego. It is from we taking the superego at the age 4 or 5, usually this age. This in this age, you can asking children what is good, what's bad. They know very what you do wrong. They know it quite clearly. Now, this guilt feeling that we develop, it's allowing us to live together and peacefully. If we don't develop this guilt feeling, we can be sometimes like psychopaths. We heard about psychopaths that they killing or they torturing other without feeling any guilt. They don't care about others. That is the reason we the ego has to learn to control self and super ego. Now, as Assyrian, we had trauma, big trauma in us, and this trauma is, we call it Sefer. The Sefer is killing of the genocide of the Assyrian. Now, the people who survived the genocide, they gave us that trauma to us, and this is why to deal with trauma is to learn how that's affected us. At the same time, the people who created this trauma, they want us to forget about it. They say, forget about it, it will be everything good. In fact, it is not the reality what they say. They say they want to hide their crime. So, for example, when we see in the neo-Nazis, when they created the crime. So who did this one? They say the boss told me, or because of the Hitler we did this. We didn't do it because what we wanted. That is one way, is showing that the people, they don't think, or superficial thinking. They don't develop this guilty feeling. If they developed guilty feeling, they would would be able to say no to such killing. Now, the creator says you should forget about it, because when they say forget about it, so that with time you will forget the issue, so that they can deal with this issue many times in the way they are doing. I'll give you an example. 1915 happened the genocide against Armenians, Assyrians. Later, 42 again started in different way. They created varlık vergisi. In this varlık vergisi, they take and take what they had, because they forget about it. Nobody cared about this matter. And later, after that was 1942 or 1955, they created pogrom with the Pontus, with the Greek. In Turkey, we know it, 6 Eylül hadisesi. Almost all Greek, they sent it to Greece. They were living in Turkey, they sent it to Greece. So they created from time to time this thing, so you forget about it, you don't need to think about it, we are thinking for you. And people say, yes, I did it because of the Reis said, or the headquarter said, or the authority said. The authority, who are this authority? Can be religious leader, can be state leader, can be many leader position, yes. And they don't allow people to think properly. They when we talking about such issue, you can see how superficial development of the identity develop in these people when they say, for example, in 1993, they tried to burn in Turkey, Madımak Alevis. They burned 43 people there to death. That happened because people, they were saying these people are dirty people. When you clean them from the society will be clean. You are, and who is giving this order is from the religious leader and as well as the state leader. They did it because of their, so they didn't do anything wrong. Now, this takes their guilt feeling in us when we say, yes, it happened, and we will say no to what you're saying. So we are striving to to our identity. That's happened to our parents, grandparents. So we don't want to happen again. This in this way we learn. When we say no to them, we learn to stand for us. And when we take this for us, so we learn to think. And that is thinking, what we call positive thinking. That's why thinking about Sefer from time to time is important in that sense for Assyrian identity. The Assyrian really developed identity through the church. They define themselves as Christian. They don't define themselves as a nation like many other nations. Most of them did. That we have a problem. Of course, the Assyrian nationalism started very late. And of course, some people, intellectual, they accepting it that we started late as a nation, and that's giving us identity. And this identity, if we are, think that we are, this identity is part of us. Now, this identity telling us, you learn something that's develop you yourself as a nation, part of the nation, as part of the church, as Christian, yes. That is the way we develop our identity. Now, we can see, for example, we'll see two issues. We have, as Assyrian, we take the trauma with us wherever we're going. Now, there are the intellectuals telling us how we will live our life in these foreign countries. In these foreign countries accepting us as a Christian. We're lucky in that sense, as a Christian we are accepted. But as a nation, still we struggle with this identity, most of us, unfortunately. Now, then we should see why is this happening. Is happening again and again because as a child we were told we are only Christian, and when we grow up we take this Christian identity, and as a nation it's always we're in second place because it wasn't as strong as the church authority. Now, that is one reason the second identity is not accepted by the Assyrian, yes. Or slowly it take part accepting us. Some, they say, okay, I am questioning this identity that I have, so I can develop my new identity. And this is through, again, learning process, learning to strive to be with others, to unite with others through the nation or through the church. That is what we have. And to be able to stand with this matter, we have to see what we can do. It is to control the super ego or be with the super ego sometimes, so that the super ego that shouldn't crush our identity, our self ID. We should be able to manage super ego. And when we can manage, we develop strong personality. That's what we are aiming with our life, yes. At the moment, I want to stop here. If you have a question, we can deal with the questions, yes. It's better to deal with this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zaito, Todi Ghalabe Osio Zaito, Lumede Dimqadam Loch Lashanan Dioma. If there are any questions from people in the audience, I would take them now, please. We have about 5 minutes for questions. No?
What is the general psychological definition of identity person? For example,
I can't hear.
No, please.
Erickson said, or other psychologists, the classical definition. So the classical definition, identity, psychology, or description.
Okay. The question is from Samira Sare from Germany. She is asking about what is the general psychological or classical definition for identity?
In a psychoanalytic way is to be able to control superego and develop a personality that is be allowing to live peacefully with the society. That's in actual meaning identity. There are different way of identity is, of course, in philosophical term is different, but I approach from psychoanalytical way. This is control self and super ego. But the main issue is with the ego striving to be with a loved one, to be together. Now, superego in creating many hindrances. So, ego should be able to go with superego in order to reach to the loved one. Yes, that is the ego in a sense.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, the last question. يقرأ عبد المسيح. Okay, kommer. Buathro. Okay, okay. Okay. So the question is from Malfouna Abdul Masih Bar Abraham. He's asking, as somebody that's gone back to live in Turkey, who's from the diaspora, actually. So you studied many years in Germany, and then you lived many years in Australia. Obviously, you were born and raised in Turkey, but now you've gone back after many years to live. How do you see the discrepancy between the identity of people in the diaspora, people in the homeland, and returnees such as yourself? Was that the question, Malfono? Okay.
Yeah, diaspora giving us more freedom to talk about, to question everything. This freedom, you cannot see it here. You can, unfortunately, here you have to obey what the church or in the sense the Islamic religion and the state. What to be just one shouldn't be question everything and should be accepting what they say. That's all what they want. Diaspora, on the other hand, giving us possibility to develop ourselves by questioning everything, and stand up for yourself, for your identity. And that's what I see in diaspora. Returning back to as Assyrian, I don't lose my identity because I learned how to protect my identity. and that is through diaspora, unfortunately not through home.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaito, for your presentation, for your contribution. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll be moving on to the next speaker.
Thank you.
Now we are going to Dr. Zaitoun. If you want to be with us, you are most welcome. Okay, now we are going to jump to the next session. Excellent. Okay. While she is sitting, I'm just, as you have realized, we are dealing the identity question from different perspectives. Okay? It's not just focusing on the name, on the definition, on the so and so. It's very important to have a vision, an idea, a knowledge from different perspectives, because it's a people that needs to define or to know how is this identification process. This is why we have chosen experts in psychology, in linguistic, in history, in the ancient history, and now we are going to also to deal with it from a low point of view, especially because our next speaker is Dr. Samira Sarek, who is active at the University of Applied Sciences in Cologne. Her, let's say, her conference is or has as title the protection of minority identity as a human right, using the example of the Assyrians. We are focusing on the Assyrian identity, and that has to do with what we are facing currently, what is going on in Iraq, what's going in the Middle East as a whole, and especially what's going on in diaspora. In the last time also in United Nations, we have to have a kind of clear definition of the Assyrian identity. This is why it's an excellent occasion to talk also about this issue, this topic, from this perspective. The role is yours. I'm thankful to you, Samira, that you are with us and that you can show us from this point of view the identity process. Thank you.
Yes, I thank you also for the invitation and for the possibility to talk here. And yes, and I think we will see thank you very much. I think we will see that it is also very important to know people, to know which identity they have, because if we want to have rights, then we are used to have a clear identity. So I start now. My topic is the protection of minority identities as a human right, using the example of the Assyrians. Sorry, can you help me? Because, can you show me the, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes, right, sir.
The right, okay. Thank you very much. So my structure is, what are the criteria for determining a national minority? Do the Assyrians fulfill these criteria? Which international legal regulations protect the identity of national minorities? What is the human rights solution of the Assyrians? What rights do national identity situations, what is the human rights situation of the Assyrians? I'll show that also shortly. And what rights do national minorities have when their fundamental rights are continuously disregarded? And then a short conclusion. So I'll start now. To commence, I would like to outline the international legal norms of the United Nations, especially the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights. The United Nations was founded on 10 December 1948 after the Second World War to secure world peace and universal human rights. Almost all states of the world, i.e., a total of 193 states are members of the United Nations, including Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, where the Assyrians have their ancestral settlement areas. While the protection of minorities is regulated by international law, there is no definition of national minorities in international treaties. But now in the last 20 years we have a European Framework Convention where it is defined. Although the United Nations has agreed, but in the early has agreed on some criteria for defining a national minority. So the criteria for national minority were developed in the 1970s by Francesco Capatorti, who was a special rapporteur of the subcommission of the United Nations on Prevention, Discrimination and Protection of Minorities, who used both objective and subjective criteria elements to describe what constitutes a national minority. Oh. So.
No, not this side, the other.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
Yes, it's okay. It's good. So, thank you. No. The next.
Next?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. The objective criteria are different ethnic, common history, customs, common language, common religion, common territory, smaller number of group members compared to the majority society, a non-dominant position non-dominant position in the state citizenship of the respective states. This was in 1979 developed by Francesco Capatorti, as I said. And now the question is, do the Assyrians fulfill these criteria? The Assyrians today look back on a history of almost 7,000 years. The great Assyrian Empire disintegrated around 614-10, and since then the Assyrians have been under the rule of various powers. Despite these very difficult conditions, a remnant of Christian Assyrians has survived to this day. So what about common religion? The common religion, the Assyrians adopted Christianity very early on, and today adhere to several religious denominations, including the West Syriac Church, the Orthodox Church of Antioch, and the Syriac Catholic Church affiliated with Rome. In addition, there is the East Assyrian Church to the east and the Chaldean Catholic Church, which is bound to Rome and has its patriarchal seat or had it in Baghdad. Some Assyrians also belong to the Protestant and Roman Catholic churches. Despite the diversity in denominations that they adhere to, the unifying religious factor in this context is that the Assyrians are Christians. So, and what about the language? We saw yesterday and today in the discussions that there are a lot of names for our language. I can say that they also have a common language. That's what I understood. Assyrians today speak modern Assyrian Aramaic, according to Malfono Afremildes, and according to Shabotalai, approximately with a considerable proportion of Akkadian of approximately 47 or 50%. So both told it in Assyria TV, on Assyria TV in December 2020. Smaller number, and the next criteria is, the next criteria is the smaller number. The Assyrians are unquestionable and unfortunately in their resettlement areas a smaller number as the majority society of the respective states in which they live. Moreover, and they hold the citizenship of these states and are undoubtedly only a minority in their countries of residence. And the next question is, what about the common territory? Later. The core territory of the Assyrians extend over 4 countries, namely Syria, Gozarto, Iraq, northern Iraq, including Nineveh Plain, around Mosul, and Turkey, Turkish province of Mardin as far as Diyarbakir. Their settlement area includes the region that in pre-Christian times constituted the Assyrian Empire, with spurs in Iran to the plateau at Lake of Urmia. The Assyrians fulfill the objective criteria for a national minority. And the subjective criterion comprises the common will of a national minority, which means that a national minority also should want to be a folk or a unified minority. The importance of a national minority's own will was summed by the United Nations Special Rapporteur Aurelio Cristescu in the year of 1981. He said that the fact is, whenever in the course of history people has become aware of being a people, all definitions has proved superfluous. In the case of Assyrians, it is really doubtful whether they want to be a folk or a national minority due to the variety of religious denominations and external designations that characterize them. However, their confessional differences do not necessarily contradict a common will if they want to see themselves as a folk or as a unified minority. Nevertheless, these various designations could be an indication that they do not want to see themselves as a national minority, and they refer to themselves as Assyrians, Suryoye, Süryaniler, Arameans, Chaldeans, Arab Christians, Kurdish Christians, Turkish Christians, etc. It thus cannot be denied that these different designations show how divided they are as people. However, despite this difference, the fact that internally they mainly refer to themselves in their language as Suryoye or Süryaniler, as Nicholas said that, indicates that they do want to be a folk or a national minority. So we can see this on this picture that also it shows that our friends of Suryoye, Atiya, we know her, and she went to Iraq, and yes, they want to be it. However, despite of differences, the fact is that they want to be it. According to this statement, only, also according to this, the will of them is really very important, and then whether or not the national minority and their different designations then become a peripheral aspect, these all designations and denominations. Because the Assyrians fulfill the criteria of a national minority, according to the criteria accepted by the United Nations, the question of the legal protection of minorities must be raised. The protection of minorities is a second-generation human right, and it is also codified in the international treaties. For instance, with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR of 1966, the United Nations codified this aspect in Article 27. The impetus for the protection of minorities as stipulated in the United Nations international law arose from the process of decolonization which began in the 1950s. At that time, it became clear that protection against discrimination alone was not sufficient to preserve the identity of national minorities. Therefore, the original discrimination protection framework of the United Nations was transformed into the Article 27 ICCPR of 1966, which stipulates. In those states in which ethnic, religious, or linguistic minorities exist, persons belonging to such minorities shall not be denied the right in community, the other members or their group to enjoy their own culture, to profess and practice their own religion, or to use their own language. Since this provision is primarily aimed at eliminating discrimination against minorities, it does not stipulate any further special rights for such groups. In terms of content, the regulation determines that members of a minority group are bearers of the human right to exercise their culture, religion, and use their own language. Although it is generally accepted that this right can be exercised within a collective, it is not formulated as a collective right, but it's an individual right, an individual right of the members of a minority, national minority. for example. In particular, the Article 27 ICCPR focuses on states committing themselves to refrain from their measures that would create pressure on minorities to integrate or assimilate into the majority society. In addition, the United Nations member states have not only undertaken to protect the constitutional elements of a national identity, language, religion, culture, and history of minorities, but also to promote them. So what is the situation of the Assyrians in their settlement territories? So to commence this section of my talk, I would like to refer to a description of the situation of Assyrians that I found on the homepage of www, as you see, minorityrights.org. I think that a lot of you should know this site or knows this site, which is an international minority rights group and an international non-governmental organization with an international governing council that meets twice a year. So how is the situation? I found the following description of the Assyrians classified according to the countries in which they live. We start with Turkey. The reality of Assyrians in Turkey. This picture signs the genocide of 1950, and on this homepage of the site, I found this information. The United Nations Organization of Non-Represented Nations and People, UNPOM, estimates that approximately 750,000 Christians were killed between 1915 and 1918. Especially in the 1920s and 30s in Turkey, continued to suffer as their villages and families were given Turkish names, which was a measure of forced assimilation. Moreover, the Assyrians have been caught between the mills of both warring parties since 1984, as you know, when the war between the Turkish armed forces and the Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK began. At that time, Assyrian villages and houses were forcibly evacuated. People were displaced en masse, and their houses and villages were burned down. Furthermore, they were neither adequately compensated nor were they offered alternative accommodation. The majority of Assyrians fled abroad. Several hundred Assyrian intellectuals or other prominent figures have been killed since the 1960s. In the 1990s, report by Amnesty International and other human rights organizations documented the ongoing persecution of Assyrians in Turkey, involving abductions, including of priests, forced conversions to Islam, coercive marriages through rape and killings. This pressure and other more insidious forms of discrimination have dramatically reduced the number of Assyrians in their homeland. Turkey has not extended the scope of the Treaty of Lausanne to Assyrians, whereby the exclusion of Assyrians from their treaty is highly detrimental to them. For instance, because of this exclusion, they have no right to education in their mother tongue, and they are also not permitted to establish their own schools, which is possible for other minorities, albeit with some government restrictions. Syria. We see a destroyed church in Syria in 2013. Assyrians live in the Khabur Valley. In the Jazira, northeastern Syria, most belong to the Assyrian Old Church on the east side, while some are affiliated to the Chaldean Catholic Church. Since the beginning of the civil war, however, many long-established Christian communities have been displaced by conflict or pressure, drastically reducing their numbers. In Aleppo, the Christian Assyrian population declined from 250,000 to 30,000 by the end of 2016. Attacks on the areas with Christian majorities during the conflict led to the large-scale displacement of Assyrian Christian civilians. The advance of the Islamic State, ISIS, in Syria since 2015 had disastrous consequences for Assyrians. For instance, on 23 February 2013, ISIS attacked 35 Assyrian Christian villages along the Khabur River in the northeastern district of Halasaka. According to Assyrian news agencies, the armed group abducted 253 Assyrians, including many women and children. At the same time, approximately 3,000 people fled the area, where 11 churches were destroyed. On 6 August 2015, ISIS captured the town of Qartayan near Homs and abducted at least 230 civilians, including dozens of Assyrian Christians. During the conflict, numerous priests were abducted or killed. According to the Syrian Network for Human Rights, 63 churches were attacked by the end of April 2015. It's only an example, this picture. And now, shortly to the situation of Assyrians in Iraq. Sorry for this picture, it's a little bit, yes. In Iran, Christians have their own representative in the Iranian parliament, what is fine. The population in 1999 was about 40,000. Assyrians living in Iran have difficulty maintaining their Assyrian language and culture, as Assyrian schools must teach children in Persian in all classes, including religious education classes and evening classes set up for Assyrian children in churches. Since the early 1990s, numerous Christian leaders have been also killed or found murdered. Now to the Iraq. The advance of the Islamic State in Iraq and Al-Sham, ISIS 2014, had disastrous consequences for Assyrians. Sorry, I have to drink a little. The ISIS take over the city of Mosul in 2014. Led to hundreds of Assyrian Christians families fleeing to the Nineveh plains and areas controlled by Christian regional government. The remaining Christian families were given an ultimatum to either convert to Islam, pay jizya or tribute, or to be killed. By July 2014, almost all Christian families had left the city. ISIS marked Christian houses in Mosul with the Arabic letter of N for Nazarene and declared them the property of the Islamic State, while ISIS supporters looted Christian homes. Between 6 and 7 August 2014, ISIS took control of all Assyrian areas in the Nineveh Plain, including, in the Nineveh, including, including Tel Isqaf, Bartalla, Karamles, Batnaya, Tel Kef, and Iraq's largest Christian town, Karakosh, previously home to 50,000. This triggered another wave of displacement with some 200,000 people fleeing. Assyrians were not only displaced a large numbers, but also suffered the deliberate destruction of their historical, cultural, and religious heritage, as we see or saw at the pictures in the media. Starting in 2014, ISIS destroyed many Assyrian churches, tombs, and historical sites, some of which were thousands of years old. Some examples include the Assyrian Green Church in Tikrit, the ancient city of Hatra, and the historic Assyrian capital of Nimrud. The terror group also destroyed a large number of artifacts in the Mosul Museum, most of which testified to the ancient Assyrian civilization. In response to this latest wave of violence and the perceived failure of the Iraqi authorities to protect them, many Assyrians decided to flee. The number of Assyrians living in Iraq subsequently continued to decline and is now only a small fraction of what it was before 2003. Those who still live there fear for their safety, especially in Baghdad, where bombings and kidnappings are frequent and climate is very hostile. In Kurdish areas, Assyrians are forced to support the political aims of the two dominant Kurdish parties, and illegal construction on Assyrians' land is common. The reports outlined here also coincide with those in other media and numerous testimonies from those affected. Thus, it can be summarized that the Assyrians undergo constant violations of both their fundamental individual and collective rights as a minority and as an indigenous people in all their countries of origin. The continuity and intensity of the brutal attacks in the past and the present threaten their existence as Assyrians and as a Christian minority. Given the very difficult human rights situation of the Assyrians in their homeland, the question of the meaning of the rights of self-determination of people arises. The United Nations has already made clear on several occasions that the right of people to self-determination should not lead to peoples founding their own independent states. This opinion was formulated by the former Secretary General of the United Nations from 1992 to 1996, Boutros Ghali, in the following words: if every ethnic, religious, or linguistic group claimed statehood, there would be no limit to fragmentation, and peace, security, and economic well-being for all would become ever more difficult to achieve. In 1966, the General Assembly placed the right of peoples to self-determination at the forefront of the Human Rights Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The Article 1 reads, all people have the right to self-determination, but by virtue of this right, they freely determine their political status and exercise their freedom to shape their economic, social, and cultural development. The right of people to self-determination even entitles them to found their own state in exceptional cases, namely when peoples, minorities, or territories are subjugated to violations of international law, and there is no other way to remedy the violations. In such cases, secession is accepted as the only and last resort. In his study, 1981, entitled The Right to Self-Determination, published in New York, Aurelio Cristescu, the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations, formulated these as follows: the right of secession, unquestionable, exists in a special but very important case, that of peoples, territories, and entities subjugated in violation of international law. From the data presented, there is no doubt that the treatment of the Assyrians in their settlement areas violates international law. Conclusion: based on the extent to which the Assyrians are systematically, through brutal violence in violation of international law, they would have the right to establish their own state. On a daily basis, the Assyrian people are not only violated in their fundamental individual right, but the states in which they live and of which they hold citizenship, namely Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, are also systematically destroying their national, cultural, and religious, whereby each state approaches this in a unique way. The Assyrians thus need strong actors on political and all other levels if they are not to disappear completely from their old ancestral settlements before long. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Samira, for this very informative and excellent conference. As we are a bit late, I would just give the occasion to two very short questions and two short answers, if there is or we have any. Please. If not, we are going to start with the second one. So I'm grateful to you.
Thank you.
Samira Sare, for, as I said, this excellent contribution. And now I'm going to invite the last speaker before we are going to have some special food to eat. By the way, if somebody is thirsty, probably we didn't say it, there are waters. You can take this in that box. I have been talked to that there was not water, but they were there, but we didn't know where it was put. So, good. Thank you again. And now we are going to have, we have introduced a slight change for the practical issues. I will explain it while Dr. Yves Sadat will come and sit. You know, from after a session of Dr.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. After the session of Dr. Abdul Masih Saadi, the whole evening or afternoon will be concentrated on wonderful music that we are going to enjoy this afternoon. Is it okay? Please, Eve. And this is why I have asked if instead giving her speech in the afternoon, she will do it now, and then we are going to have lunch all together. As I told you, we will move all together from here directly. The restaurant is about 3-4 minutes walking from here, and so we can all go together. And now allow me to introduce you our last speaker, Dr. Yves Jorsada belongs to this prominent young Assyrian generation group that is dealing also with a special topic, because a people without its own music, its own traditions and cultural aspects can't be considered as real, alive people. This is why I thought that it was good also to introduce probably a fourth pillar in our future research works that will have to deal with that. And most part of the researchers are female, which is for me a huge pleasure to count on such talents within the Nineveh Chair. So Yves Jorsada is an Assyrian choir conductor, music educator, and research born and raised in Iraq, I would say in Assyria. Yves completed her academic journey at the University of Oklahoma. What's the... ¿Qué pasa con este ruido? Okay. I will then open it, yeah. As I was telling, Yves completed her academic journey at the University of Oklahoma, earning a Doctor of Musical Arts in choral conducting and Master in Music Education. Dr. Jorsada received the 2021 Provost Dissertation Award from the University of Oklahoma for her exceptional research in the field of humanities and fine arts. I enjoyed many parts of her dissertation when she was doing it, because there were questions, linguistic questions that we discussed, and I'm happy to have her here with us. In her study of Assyrian Syriac chants from the liturgy of the Church of the East, Dr. Yves explored the chants from the 4th to 7th centuries of distinguished theologians and poets as Mar Aprem or Saint Ephrem, Mar Narsai, and so on. She examined the diverse genres of church hymnody, including Sohyata, Madrashe, Tujabhata, Onyata, and Mamre. These are the terms that belong to our liturgical tradition. Dr. Sada also provided a unique perspective on the early experience or existence of women's choir within the Church of the East tradition. It's not the first one. Saint Ephrem did it in the 4th century. Yeah. No, just I'm joking. Prior to her time at the University of Oklahoma, Dr. Sada served as a faculty member and assistant dean at the School of Arts and Design at the University of Jordan, where she published articles in music education and vocal psychology. Currently, She has been recently hired in a very important center, which is called Center for the Study of World Religions, Howard Divinity School. We put just there, I'm specifying because we had a slight mistake on our informative sheet. So, again, as you can see, the topics are diverse, and this is the beauty of such gatherings. I'm not going to take more time. The role is yours, and thank you for accepting to be here with us, Eve.
Thank
The
you.
role is yours.
بسي مرابا رابا بغداين قد هوين قا شيتا دتري قا لماذا تكرسي ننويق وبتصوبت سلامانكا كما دانا اتلي من بانا 3 دقيقة
بش
اوكي بسي مرابا my topic today will be preserving and documenting the Assyrian musical legacy, a valuable contribution to the global cultural heritage. رابا من نوخي والخا last year مشو تبي قداها لماذا and I went through my dissertation with the genres, the main 5 genres that I examined in my dissertation. هدية قمقرولو ملبانا أفرم. This year, actually, so my documentation started like 2 years ago. And that was, I remember I let you to listen to some of the audio files, if you remember. And this year, I'm going to work on documenting and promoting our chants and Assyrian music in general. But now I'm starting with the church chants. So just a brief overview, of the Assyrian musical legacy. The music legacy of the Assyrian people is an integral element of their rich cultural heritage. It includes a wide variety of musical styles and genres that have evolved over thousands of years, found in religious chants, folk tunes, and in modern compositions. Preserving our cultural heritage is essential as it allows us to maintain a connection with our roots and understand the history and traditions of our ancestors. Furthermore, by preserving our Assyrian musical tradition, we ensure that the world acknowledges and values our culture's distinctive contributions to worldwide musical heritage. Assyrian music holds a profound historical significance, reflecting the rich cultural heritage of the ancient Assyrian civilization, which flourished in Mesopotamia over 4,000 years ago. This music played a vital role in religious ceremonies, royal courts, in the royal courts, and everyday life using different musical instruments such as lyres, harps, wind, string, and percussion instruments. Assyrian folk music has preserved the oral traditions of this ancient civilization by recounting tales of conquests, struggles, and resilience through the ages. Today, Assyrian music continues to serve as a bridge connecting modern Assyrians with their past, preserving their identity and cultural heritage for generations to come. Understanding the historical context helps us to deepen our appreciation for the unique melodies, rhythms, and instruments used in Assyrian music, and allows us to recognize its influence on other musical traditions. And this was actually last year when, it was July, I went to Oxford, and then, of course, I visited the British Museum. Every time we're in London, we go and visit the British Museum. And I just want to show these 2 lyres. One has this golden, the bull head, and then the other one is the silver one. They are reconstructed, of course, but they are from 2600 BC, and one is called the Queen's Lyre and the Silver Lyre. I think they found 4 of them. Some of them, I think, in Iraq, in the Iraqi Museum, the other 2, and they were excavated in the city of Ur. And this is from the Louvre, and we can see the Assyrian musicians with different percussion, string, and even clapping. And this is from 640 BC. The oral transmission in Assyrian music is an important key aspect to consider in documentation due to the lack of written musical notation system in ancient times. Therefore, the passing down of musical knowledge and traditions relied heavily on oral transmission. So passing down melodies and stories through generations was a way for the Assyrian people to connect with their, as I said, with our ancestors and maintain strong cultural heritage. This oral tradition also allowed for the incorporation of new influences and adaptations over time, ensuring that Assyrian music remained dynamic and relevant to contemporary audiences. The oral transmission fostered a strong sense of community and cultural identity among the Assyrian people. Additionally, oral transmission allowed for improvisation and variation within the performances, making each rendition of a song or melody unique and personal. Now, of course, we have challenging in preservation and even in documentation. So challenges faced in preserving the musical legacy of the Assyrian people include the loss of traditional musical style and their unique performance practices. And I think Lolita in the morning in her session, she mentioned a little bit about the performance practices, and I'm glad she defined the performance practices, because sometimes what we're seeing that people are recording but then changing a lot of the performance practice. They're not presenting the chant as it should be present or chanted. So we're losing that part of documenting or showing how the chants were. In this case, we're talking about chants. It could be any other genre. The inability to collect the melodies in the style and the mode that has been handed down through generations, as well as the knowledge of how to perform these melodies, results in the loss of the essential element of essence of music. So sometimes what we have been seeing, like because of the people in the diaspora, they're not using Oriental instruments. And you know, most of our chants have the modes, or what we call maqam, and they're using Western keyboards. So we're losing that part, that the sense of the mode and the maqam, and it became like a Western major and minor scales. So it is changing. Therefore, efforts must be initiative by different individuals in the Assyrian communities worldwide to preserve and revive their musical heritage through the recording projects, what we're doing right now with the university that I'm working in, and in my personal traveling, cultural festivals, public performances, and we're going to see one of the public performances, and of course digital archiving. And this is my next step, would be digital archiving is very important. These endeavors aim to ensure that future generations can continue to appreciate and celebrate their rich musical tradition. If you remember, some of you were here last year, I led you to listen to some of the audio files from Rabita Farida Adam. She's in Toronto, Canada. And I will let you listen again to the same one audio file, and then we will watch a 2-minute YouTube. And you can see what we did in 5 months after the Lumada, the first one, how we, I worked on that audio file and how I presented in a public performance outside the church. So that's what we want to do. Documenting is very important, but also promoting our chants, our music, our folk songs outside the usual performance. And in this case, it was the church at the chant. So I will just play. It's very loud. Okay. And 5 months later, we had a performance with Assyrian Arts Institute in California. And we had a Christmas, actually, concert in Assyrian language, but different melodies. Some were Western melodies, just using Assyrian language, the text. So, but we actually opened the concert with this chant. Now in a public performance, can we, Vega, play the first 2 minutes? And you see that I kept the antiphonal way that it used to be performed at church. So I had 6 people doing this. By the way, Lolita is one of them, did one of the solo too. So, and they had to learn the mode, the maqam, and it was maqam, Oriental maqam. And we used the nai actually just to have this kind of like a background, but not the main thing. We kept it kind of like the chant is the important thing. Yes, please. And can you turn it up? Maybe you need the mic. I think. Same تشبخته برخنانة by Marba Rabba. Yeah, can you turn it up? Because he's playing. Oh, we can't? Because that's yeah. I think you need a mic.
Yes, could be.
Yeah. Can you? No? Okay. Oh, that one. With, yeah, maybe that's better. Yeah, just from the beginning. So we were 3, 6, 3, and 3 doing the antiphon Brekhanana, and it's a 6th century chant. No, I think you need this. Oh, you know what? I have the... yeah, but can you hear?
Good.
slides. The slides, yes, please. Thank you. So this was like kind of like an application, how we want to document, but also to use the chant in a public performance. And we are working on, like I'm working on other chants, so we can have them performed in other performances. Does it need time? Nine. Yes, please. Slide 9. Yes, documentation. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So by allowing for high quality audio and video recordings that can be easily shared and accessed, we can do this documenting through recording, digitizing, archiving. This is all, we know it's technology aid in documenting and preserving our Assyrian music. Introducing Assyrian music to other cultures and public performances so that they can become an integral part of the global music repertoire. As a music choral conductor, I always wanted to include our music, but I couldn't include it because in my programs, we don't have the proper music notation that other choirs can just take and read. So this is what I am willing to work on. So make it accessible to other choirs who don't speak Assyrian, who just want to perform this kind of genre from the Church of the East or from the East in general. By digitizing traditional songs and recordings, this allows for wider accessibility and ensures that the unique melodies and rhythms are not lost over time. Now, we need, of course, collaborative efforts, a collaboration between different Assyrian communities and scholars, organizations, individuals, and many initiatives have played a significant role in fostering these collaborations. For example, the Assyrian Music Foundation has been instrumental in bringing the Assyrian Arts Institute, bringing together musicians, scholars. Now what we're doing here in the Lumada Nineveh Chair, we are presenting our research, we're sharing with you what we're doing, we're having performances. Today you'll see one of the performances. So this is all will help us to document, promote, and share our music. So the role of our music in Assyrian culture and society, especially in our rituals, celebrations, and everyday lives, music serves as a means of preserving and passing down our history, stories. We hear stories in our folk music and values from one generation to the next, whether it's the lively beats or of traditional Assyrian dances or the melodies of ancient hymns or chants or church music. And it's a source of pride and unity for Assyrian worldwide. And we can see here. Linguistic impact. So just by presenting this chant to this group of young ladies who were most of them were born in the diaspora from different places, Australia, America, Canada, they learned the Syriac, the old text, the Assyrian text in Lishana Atiqa, because they had to learn the meaning, they learned the language. So our song lyrics are inspired by cultural themes and historical events. We can explore further into our cultural themes and history by listening to Assyrian music lyrics. The language utilized in these songs not only provides a lyrical quality, but it is also an effective tool for sharing and preserving our past. Each word has the weight of our ancestors' experiences, allowing us to reconnect with our roots and deepen our feeling of Assyrian identity. Therefore, Assyrian singers, I think, and I see, they have a big responsibility to use the lyrics that resonate with our people, where the listeners can connect with their history through the songs. Musical diversity. Assyrian music contains a variety of musical styles. Now, I'm starting this year to work on the church chants, but when I'm presenting this, I mean for all Assyrian music, whether it's folk or sacred or secular music. Assyrian music contains a variety of musical styles from both the sacred and the secular musical heritage, demonstrating the complexity and the progression of our musical traditions. Folk songs with their lively rhythm and traditional instrumentation, such as Zurna Dahula, represent our daily lives and like celebrations. We cannot go to a Khlula, or if there is no Zurna and Dahula, we feel like there is something missing. Religious hymns reflect our beliefs while also providing a spiritual link to our tradition. Now, the process of recording and transcribing, it's not just the audio recording, right? We do the music notation. We will do the, of course, if you want to provide this notation to a choir who they don't speak Assyrian, they're not Assyrian, we need the translation of the text. We also need the transliteration of the text so they can read it correctly. And then they need aids like audio. They can listen to a video like this. They can see maybe how the performance practice of this chant, the style, actually the singing style. We don't sing like the operatic, the Western singing style. We have that kind of like nasal kind of quality style. So this is all different. So we need to have like in our music way, we do have exercises for the choral people, for the musicians, so they know how to sing these chants. Additionally, transcribing the music involves not only notating the main melodies. Sometimes we're seeing this, and Lolita and I always, we talk about this. We see like the basic melody, but sometimes we need to also include the ornamentations that are used in our culture when they sing. And at least have the idea for other performance, maybe how to perform these chants. Because that kind of the characteristics of the rich musical tradition. The importance of capturing nuances and techniques when documenting music is also crucial in preserving the authenticity and of different musical styles. By accurately, we're trying to say accurately, it's hard because we don't, it's hard to have like a specific time signature, it's kind of like more free, so we're trying to get that kind of like accurate. Documenting these nuances for future generations can truly understand and replicate the unique techniques and expressions that define our cultural heritage. The preservation of musical history leads to a larger cultural, it's a revival and promotes cultural interchange and understanding by allowing for the discovery and appreciation of other musical styles and genres. We give future generations of musicians with the inspiration by preserving our musical legacy, allowing them to create new and inventive forms of artistic expressions. So even our new Assyrian musicians can have that can be inspired by that the old way of chanting, of folk songs, the way that we have it in our culture music. And I come to my conclusion. Preserving and documenting the Assyrian musical heritage allows future generations to appreciate and learn from the rich history and artistic expression of this culture. It also fosters cross-cultural understanding and appreciation as people from different backgrounds can discover and connect with the beauty and the complexity of Assyrian music. This can happen through the publication of different individual music, articles, and books, and by providing music notation sheets for voice and, of course, for instruments. We are working on new arrangements. By preserving and documenting this musical heritage, we ensure that its impact and significance are not lost to time It acknowledges the value and the uniqueness of Assyrian musical tradition and highlights their importance and as a cultural treasure that belongs not only to the Assyrian community, but also to the global community. Thank you very much. Tawdeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jorsada, for this excellent presentation. As you see, the richness of our legacy is such big that you will never finish to study the whole patrimony we have, even in the musical environment. Now we have a few minutes, just short questions and short answers, please, because I know that the stomach is calling, and then we'll have the chance also, in any case, if there are other questions, then we can discuss them while we are working or while we are eating. So please, Dr. Nicholas Algilo.
Eve, thank you for a wonderful presentation. The work you're doing is fantastic and vital, actually, because what you're doing for the liturgical music of the Church of the East has never been done before in a proper way. Now, you know firstly that the music of the Church of the East is not the sole representative of Assyrian religious music. There is also the music of the Syrian-Orthodoxe Church. And since maybe 25 or 30 years, especially in Germany, there have been notations of the music of the Syriac-Orthodoxe Church. One of them, for example, the Beth Gazo by Malpana Nuri Skandar from Aleppo. And also there's been the recordings by Dr. Abraham Lahdo, which they've actually matched the music of the church with Eastern musical instruments. So how much of that firstly has inspired you in your work? How much of that have you drawn upon, firstly? And secondly, I know a different way of chanting Brich Hannana from the Church of the East.
Right.
So how have you managed to choose which melody to use? Because not only in the Church of the East itself, Old and New Calendar, you have different tunes, but also in the Chaldean Church, which comes from the tradition of the Church of the East.
7? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nicholas. So for the first part of your the question, yes, it is hard to. I try to listen to a lot of YouTube's recordings. Yes, the Syriac-Orthodoxe Church, yes, inspired me because they were advanced in that part of notation, recordings. They have recordings from, I think in the 1970s, they did the recordings in Germany, like a German group, they did those recordings. So yes, we're kind of like a little bit late. For 50 years later, we're doing that field of recording. But even within the Church of the East, yes, the same hymn or the same chant could have different qale, and it depends on different locations of the church, whether it was like sometimes if it's Iraq, Turkey, Syria, or even within one country. So I'm trying to look at other elements in the chanters. I'm not looking at chanters who were born in diaspora, who were trained Western music notation system, the Western tuning system. I'm looking at the generation that came from original places like in Iraq or from Matwatet. They listen to more authentic style. And of course, we will never have the exact that we can say this is the right, there's no right or wrong in the chants, but you can tell if it's more authentic than other versions or of the same qala. Now, with the Chaldean church like the Chaldean church, yes, we have some similar qala, but where is the problem? We don't have a database. We don't have a database, so we say, oh, Brekhanana here, we have 3, let's do the comparison and, compare and contrast. Where is the difference? When this difference, appeared, is it in the mode? Is it in the beginning? We don't. So even the Chaldean church now, and I'm working with a friend from the Chaldean church in Sweden, his name is Ninos. He's doing the same, actually. So we're trying to first analyze what we have. We need to do this database first, and then we go to the next step and compare and see where the differences have been occurred. And yes, even Dr. Gabriel Aydin, he did a very good job with notation, and I have that book at Harvard. It's over my desk, and I look at his work. It's very, it is inspired. I was inspired by that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think we are going to conclude this morning session. I'm thankful to you also for your patience, because being from the morning until now here. And now a practical, and thank you again, Dr. Eve, just a whole and now practical and important points. As I told you, we are going all together to have lunch. This is the policy of Nineveh Chair, to put you all together, and we have a nice place where, yes, cut please, we
Hey, na, na, na.